Good morning. Okay, so I'm going to start out and ask a question to everybody. Who out here has had a forced landing or an emergency, had an emergency coming up that they needed to get the airplane on the ground? Okay, so you guys know how bad that can get. So one of the patents I came up with was that I call Safe Area Flight Emergency, helps the pilot deal with that situation. So if you look at the problem, and especially for UAVs, if you have to put the vehicle down, you don't want to put it into a populated area, into a playground or something like that. That could be really bad news. Pilots have had to deal with the situation based on their skill, experience, and a lot of luck. And then when you start adding in these other issues that come up, like weather. So if you're in IFR, you lose an engine, you're at a fairly low altitude, boy, it can get really dicey. And so now you're going through your charts, you're trying to figure out where you are, do you have a place to land? Do I have enough energy to get there? And so all these issues come up and as you're trying to work through it. So one of the things that happened to me, I was visiting a friend out in Woodward, Oklahoma, flying the Vigan, and I was returning back, and I was just scanning my instruments like I normally do, and following a highway, and I looked down, and I noticed my oil pressure's starting to drop off. Huh, that's weird. Is it a sensor problem, or do I have a real problem? So I started pulling out my charts, figuring out, okay, where am I, and that kind of thing. Oil pressure continues to drop. So I said, I'm going to have to do a landing somewhere. So luckily, you got to understand, this is in the early 90s, and I had just bought a KLX 135 GPS, and it had that nice little feature, nearest airport. So I popped that in and said, oh, okay, Enid Airport. And it was about 12 miles away. Now the question is, can I make it? And so I headed towards the airport, started to climb, and by then I'm out of oil. And so now I'm wondering when the engine is going to quit. So I'm now looking at other landing sites along the route and trying to head to the airport. Luckily, I made it to the airport, landed the airplane. I declared an emergency with the tower, and they put me straight in on and I ended up landing downwind, pulled off the runway, and I could hear the engine going squeak, 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 like, oh great, there goes the bearings. So shut the engine down, and there was oil all over the back of the airplane. Funny thing is, the part that failed was a certified part in an experimental airplane. So anyway, that really got me to thinking, and the workload I had, all the uncertainty, I said, there's got to be a way to start solving some of this problem. And so after a while, go to the next one, I started thinking about what do I really need? As for general aviation airplanes, I needed a capability to plan a flight plan where I knew where I had all the landing sites and what that coverage was. And if I didn't have it, I could select, I could deviate or increase my altitude to find or to have those options available to me. I wanted a way to visualize. So in other words, I wanted to look real quick and say, what are my options? And I wanted the system to always assume the worst case. I lost my engine, I'm coming down, where can I put it? And so I wanted that displayed all the time as I was flying along. Then I wanted the ability to manage my energy. This becomes really important, especially if you think, okay, well, best glide speed, I can fly to this area, but what happens if I start changing configuration? When do I need to do that? So when do I need to drop flaps, drop my gear, and still have enough energy to make it to the end of the runway? So these things are, they're hard to figure out when you're under pressure trying to do this. Another thing I wanted to be able to do is when I took off, I wanted to know when return to the airport was an option. And more pilots have killed themselves trying to get back to that nice big runway behind you. And then if you have a system that can sit there and say, no, not yet, not yet, now you can, and show you the path to go fly it and what your energy needs to be. Okay, now we get into unmanned systems. This is where, at the time I was working on unmanned systems, I went into a group within Boeing that's kind of like the Boeing DARPA. It was actually run by two ex-lab directors from DARPA. And they asked me to be the lead on developing unmanned system technologies. And so I started thinking about the problem even more. Okay, the FAA and a lot of the public are worried about airplanes crashing into other airplanes. Ultimately, all airplanes got to land up on the ground. And so if you have an engine failure, you've got to be able to put that vehicle at a landing site that you're not going to hurt anybody or damage any property. So I started working towards that goal, is how do I automate all this stuff? So this system has to be able to tell that airplane where to go, know how much energy and what the condition of the aircraft is, and then put the aircraft at a landing site. Be it land it to keep the airplane intact, but if all else fails, auger it into an area where you're not going to do any harm. Okay, so here's the system. It's called Safe Area Flight Emergency, and what I did was I took a bunch of databases, and then those databases are incorporated into a trajectory generator. And then there's tools that tap into that database that, number one, does flight planning. So you can plan your flight and have all the information about where your alternates are. So if you want to carry a piece of paper, or an in-flight display that shows this stuff in real time. So the databases I was looking at were terrain. So the function I had on the airplane to do direct to a landing, direct to an airport, didn't tell me there was a mountain in the way. So I go, fat, dumb, and happy, I'm going to go fly towards this airport and realize I can't make it. It doesn't tell me if I have enough energy to fly around that mountain. So I said the system has to do that. It has to sit there and say that's a viable airport or a landing site. So that's why terrain's in there. Obstacles. So you want to make sure you don't run into towers or you set yourself up to where you're going to slam into a power line or something like that. We also looked at vegetation. We even looked at, mapping parks, roads, all that type of information into this database. Then I looked at, with ADS-B coming available, along with the internet with cell phones, is to tap into that information. Then another offshoot patent that I had on this was actually using onboard sensors to scan the landing site and be able to, or scan for landing sites and load those into the database. So I'm going to go up here and show you so this is one of the real early videos that I did of some software I was developing that basically shows the airplane flying up the Kitsap Peninsula. And you see the red velocity vector is the dash line, and then you see the red dots. Those are waypoints that can get shipped to a navigation system. And this shows the trajectories that you have going to landing sites. In this version of the software, yellow flight track was a hard surface runway. If it turns red, it says it's an unimproved strip. So what I'm going to do is see if I can get that to play. And so this is running about 4 times the speed. And as you're flying along, it's showing your landing sites and your alternates and the path that you can take to take those. So if your engine quits, you can go select one of those. So it's very similar for a mountain climber climbing up the side of a mountain, where he's got footholds. And that's kind of the analogy I end up using. Okay, this is the in-flight display that I used. We test flew this on a Cirrus SR-20. Also flew it on Scan Eagle, Unmanned Little Bird, and several other UAVs. And so this display on the left is the situational awareness. So you'll see that it has the trajectories, the primary and the secondary trajectory off the aircraft. So the dashed line is the secondary. The little box is the blue one. It says 62, and the other one says 85. That says, based on your current velocity vector and assuming a dead stick, you've got 85 seconds to make a decision, or that goes away. So now you have an idea what's your situational awareness and how fast you have to react to the issue. Then around that is part of the patent was an area of how far can I really glide, and that's mapped to the terrain. So that's why the jagged lines. And so I called that the safe options limit. And then one of the guys pointed out and says, "You know what that stands for, don't you? SOL." So you're outside that area, you're SOL, right? And so another display we had was the energy management. So the blue line shows you where your energy is going into Boeing Field, and the red line shows you where your energy is going into Renton Airport. And so that way you can manage your energy and get an idea of which airport really is the good one to go to. So it's still in development. I think the FAA has realized that we got to have a capability like this. The things that I've heard were, this is the next DAA. It's the next big problem that they got to solve. And I think we're well on our way and being able to solve these type of problems. Thank you.